You all know Michael Malice by now, of course. He's a celebrity ghostwriter and a very successful and good one. You can see him regularly on Kennedy on the Fox Business Network. He is also the author of Dear Reader, the unauthorized autobiography of Kim Jong-il, an excellent book. Michael, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Tom.
I tweeted something out about this controversy about Amy Robach of Good Morning America. She was trying her best to make an anti-racist statement, which, you don't get any extra points when you're trying to make an anti-racist statement when you accidentally say something that offends the snowflake.
Colored people.
It just speaks to how race in the media is played. She said that there should be certain movie roles reserved for colored people, as opposed to the preferred term, which is people of color. And I think your tweet was something like having the word "of" in there and a little bit different syntax, is the difference between being in the Klan and being enlightened.
Yeah. Let me jump in on that. Yeah, I said I've never used the term colored people because, of course, it reminds me of Archie Bunker from when I was growing up.
Right.
So I wouldn't use the term colored people. But I said, but isn't it bizarre that that's unforgivable and that the correct term is people of color? Is it the missing preposition that's the issue? It's just weird the way the rules of discourse work in America, that you could be that close to being driven out of society just in the way you arrange these words. I mean, I don't care where you stand on the racism spectrum. That's screwed up. That was the point of my tweet.
My question for you is, was that tweet meant facetiously or rhetorically, or were you sincerely asking, why is this a difference?
I was having fun with these people because my view is that obviously there is no substantive difference between the two. It's a matter of these people want to control and dominate all these situations. They want to make clear who's in charge, and you are not in charge. And you will sit there and pathetically beg our forgiveness, and we'll consider whether we're going to grant it. That's the position they like to be in. That's my view.
Well, I think that's the position most people like to be in, to be fair. But the point I made, and I thought that you were being sincere to some extent, that you thought it was ridiculous. And the point I was making is it's not ridiculous in the sense that they are being somewhat consistent in their use of language and its role. And its role isn't necessarily to dominate for the sake of dominating. The term colored is a historic anachronism, right? It used to be the term for black people in the South, especially in the South, back in, I don't even know when it started changing to black, then Afro-American, then African-American. This was the Jim Crow era. Nowadays, people of color is the term because it refers just to black people, non-white Hispanics, and sometimes other people get grouped into that depending on whether or not the speaker wants to regard them as being oppressed. Sometimes it means people from the Indian subcontinent in that area. Sometimes it doesn't. But I don't think that most people understand how this works because it's not arbitrary. Let me break it down how it works like I wrote in my article. If I'm a progressive in the religious sense, I want to constantly demonstrate my commitment to the progressive agenda. And one of the easiest ways any group demonstrates their commitment to an ideology is through the use of jargon. We certainly see this in libertarianism. We see this in objectivism. We see this with the Republicans when Republicans talk about, I'm a real American or something like that. And progressives have the same thing. Everyone wants to use the correct progressive terminology because, as this woman found out, when you don't use the correct progressive terminology, you're going to have negative consequences because they're in a position to hurt people who aren't playing by their rules. And this has been demonstrated more times than you can count. So now, if the progressives want you to use the correct words to demonstrate that you're a progressive, and everyone is going to try to use those correct words because everyone's trying to pass as a progressive, well, that's a problem because progressives can't identify each other by using the correct words because a lot of people are lying and just using their jargon to kind of swim with the tide. So then they have to start constantly changing the words that they use in order to have their cues be current, just like clothes. In the same way that not that long ago, people would say mentally retarded, and it was not an offensive term at all. It was used as a descriptor. And then there was this campaign, ban the R word. This term was not used as approbation. This was a descriptor of people who had mental disabilities.
Just read the dictionary definition of retard.
Right.
That is exactly what we're dealing with.
So what happens is when you keep changing these terms, if someone uses an outdated term, that is a cue,
a dog whistle,
that they aren't caught up with the program, that they're not on the progressive bandwagon. They're always looking for outliers to attack and destroy because there's a group of people who appoint themselves as the police, and now they know who to swarm. In one sense, this is something that could be foreseen because they act this way consistently and repeatedly across different areas.
All right. First of all, the preposterousness of the faux outrage of all this, that she failed to put the preposition in the middle of the words and she got them in the wrong order. How tone deaf about American society would you have to be? If she said this again, she'd be off Good Morning America.
Goodbye.
That'd be it.
Right.
We would never hear from her again. It's impossible to have a rational conversation with anybody who is that upset about what was, to my mind, obviously a slip of the tongue and a mistake by her.
I'm going to disagree with you a little bit because let me explain their view on race. I think a lot of people who are not progressives get frustrated by their view of race, and they're kind of talking past each other, okay? So this is the metaphor I used. Let's suppose you have a school and a bunch of kids are in detention. For this kind of detention, you have to write an essay saying what did you do wrong and why you won't do it again. And the teacher who's in charge of detention is grading the papers. And once she says, okay, you did a good job, you can leave detention. Now, someone knocks on the door and tells the teacher, we've got a school shooter. Someone's shooting up the school. Get out of here. And the teacher says, well, we're not leaving until I finish grading these papers. And the guy goes, what are you talking about? There's a school shooter. And do you not think this is an issue? And the teacher will say, okay, I'll lock the door. Now, if you were the person talking to this teacher, you would think she is either insane or evil. At the very least, you would not respect her and you would ignore her and try to get those kids out of there, right?
Yeah, of course.
So this is their idea of racism. For someone to say that racism is a problem and to acknowledge racism is a problem, but not act immediately as if this is a huge emergency that's happening everywhere in your environment, from their perspective, you're in that position of the teacher. From their perspective, if racism exists, it is an emergency and as pervasive as the school shooter, and locking the door is not going to matter. So when people say, I care about race, I'm not prejudiced, that's not enough for the progressives, because for them, if something is this big of a problem and your response to it is some minor change in behavior, you're dismissing this problem and you're ignoring it when it's on the level of a metaphysical outrage that is happening constantly.
So in other words, in your view, this is not just a raw effort to exert power over other people. It also has roots in a whole way of viewing the world.
Well, I wouldn't use the word roots because of the pun, but right, it's their worldview. And the question that I love to ask people on the left is there a point at which the cost of fighting racism and discrimination outweighs the benefit? Is there like a little amount you could be happy with? And many who are approaching this from a rational perspective, who think we should live in a country where people are treated fairly, that mentality of which I subscribe to, they'll say, yeah, of course, you're never going to be able to eradicate it. Everyone's going to have their prejudiced grandma, and that's fine. But the evangelical progressives, even asking that question to them is insane and makes you morally suspect.
I'm not saying it's impossible ever to offend someone or that everything you might want to say is a good thing. Nobody's saying that. What fascinates me is just the process. We all know what's going to happen to that person. There's going to be the ritual denunciations,
yes,
and then the response is the abasement and the firm commitment to amendment of life. I mean, it is bizarre.
Why is it bizarre if it's something that follows something that's already had precedent? It's the opposite of bizarre. Progressivism is just Christianity without the mythology. So, of course, they're going to use the historical methods that have worked because they have worked. So they're conservatives in that sense. So why would they try to reinvent the wheel?
What did you think about the statement that appeared in the acceptance letter for the class of 2020 from the University of Chicago? I assume you saw that?
Yeah, they were talking about no safe spaces and no trigger warnings, correct?
Yeah. What did you think about that?
The wonderful thing is that they are forcing people who don't want to talk about these things to talk about them and acknowledge them. If you are in a position of dominance, you don't have to explain yourself to anybody. The Fed doesn't have to explain itself to anybody. They are just going to do what they want with their money and keep it secret. Same thing with the CIA, FBI, or these other government, Homeland Security especially. They're not accountable. When you have progressive domination of the universities, they're going to do as they please. And it's funny when a lot of libertarians are like, oh, these are private institutions, so they don't have to answer to anybody. Well, they don't literally have to answer to anybody, but in a free market, you're perfectly allowed to critique any business's options, and they can choose to answer or not as they want. Here's my prediction. I think before you get a pushback in terms of free speech being to some extent reintroduced in campuses, it's going to be much more likely that having a university diploma is increasingly looked at as a waste of money.